Welcome.
Hello and welcome to the Stream of Truth. I am Dr. Tassel Faith Shamebrook,
And I'm Sean Kelly.
and today's topic is ending self-harm with forgiveness.
Woo! Exciting.
Yeah. So I think we're talking about self-judgment and self-forgiveness in this episode. Is that
Yeah.
right?
I think I think we what made me sort of want to talk about this because I was going through something, and what it helped me to see was that a lot of times when we think of self-harm, we think of actual like physical stuff, either some type of substance abuse perhaps, or we think of cutting ourselves or somehow hurting ourselves in that way. And I think a lot of times we don't really realize um, sort of how harmful we are to ourselves with our thoughts, and how we tend to punish ourselves with our thoughts, and we do this because we are judging ourselves. And so, the primary way to get around that is forgiveness. And I just think it's important. I think that we um, highlight that almost everyone does this to some degree, where they harm themselves through their own thoughts and actions. So you can think about things where you make decisions to do things, and you kind of know that they're not, they're causing you pain. And I'll just use an example, if that's okay, of kind of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of times the way that we do this is somewhat appropriate, if that makes sense. So, and I'll try to illustrate some of that as well. Not that I advocate for it, but we do it to ourselves. We do this. We put ourselves into the pain in order to learn how to reorganize our thoughts and feelings. Not reorganize our feelings, but reorganize our thoughts, which precipitate the feelings. So we go into the pain so that we can realize this can't be their way. Like, right? That's primarily what we're doing. We go all into that pain, and then we start to go, this just can't be right. Like, something's off here. And we often just look to the situations and then say, well, it's because of these situations. And I guess so. I'll just give the example of what I an example of what I mean. So after leaving my household and not being able to stay with my children, um, I I would, whenever I would see their pictures, I would get very upset. There would be a part of me that was just happy to see their faces and stuff, and liked that. But primarily it was pain around what I had done, and how I had left the family, and the type of pain that they'd be going through because of this. My inability to keep my promises to my ex-wife, um, to kind of keep the family together. All of these basically guilty pieces of myself would come up during this time, whenever I would see pictures of my kids. Now, at the time, for some reason or another, I decided to put a slide on this TV here. I put a slideshow of my children. At the time, it was totally unconscious. I thought, I thought that I could be closer to them if I put their pictures up, and their pictures were always there. And that was the reason, I guess. The reason. Now, that reason was nonsense. So that reason wasn't real. The reason that I actually put it there is because I wanted to steep myself in my pain, because I was trying to punish myself,
Hmm.
in a way, right? Now, I was trying to punish myself because I felt so bad about what I had done, that any pain that I could get around it would help me to feel like I was, justified, or not justified, that I had gone through my retribution, or my, I'd be able to forgive myself if I truly felt my what pain I caused, and all that type of thing. Um,
Almost like you had to suffer because you it seemed like your children were suffering, so you had to suffer to
right, right.
make it right,
Right. In
almost.
order for it to be corrected, or for me
Yeah.
to relieve myself of lots of this self-hatred and judgment, and all the pain that was coming from that, I had to make sure that their experience was very, very thoroughly considered, and all the pain that they are going through was very thoroughly felt. And that is actually like a very wise way to go about when you do something. um it is very important that we do examine these aspects in order to see the full experience, and to observe
Yeah.
things properly. It's important that we do that, but I was
Mm.
doing it in a way to punish myself.
Mm.
I was doing it in a way to hurt myself, which is not the intention of trying to observe the situation
Yeah.
from everyone's and feel their feelings. And a lot of painful feelings can come up when we do that type of work. But I was doing it in a more like self-harm oriented way.
Yeah.
I was essentially putting it front and center in my consciousness, and making it so that I would constantly be reminded, because it was
Mm.
so painful, and I felt that I deserved to be in pain. So
Uh,
I deserve to be in pain for the decisions that I made that led up to this point, and that I was responsible for what had all occurred.
mm.
And so I needed to sort of pay for that in some way.
Mm.
And this was all, it wasn't clear to me that that's what I was doing until only recently.
Yeah.
Because I started to notice this behavior in other things, and that's why I brought up the topic to talk about it. Now that that whole experience, was perfect. So we whether we put ourselves into it or it comes in sort of automatically, we draw to ourselves a chance to look at what is in us, right? We always do that. So if I had not done that, it would come up other ways. Um, what I'm realizing is that the reason that I perceived it as a so painful and everything was because of how poorly I thought of myself.
Mm.
The catalyst was offered to me to help me see what I was saying earlier, or investigating all the sides of it, to really see the experience. And so we draw to ourselves, usually through the path of least resistance, these opportunities. And so in my example, the easiest way for me to steep myself in that experience was to just put their pictures up on the TV and let it just cycle through all day long, so that every time I looked at the TV, I'd see this. And I tend to just be mostly in my room, right? Because I share my house with my parents. Well, they share their house with me, I should say. And so I don't spend a ton of time elsewhere in the house. So in order for me to constantly be sort of accosted by these emotions, I had to put the pictures up. Otherwise, I would distract myself. I would try not to think about it. I would try to just put on positive airs, right? And kind of push aside those feelings. And that's what we almost always tend to do naturally as humans, is just set them aside instead of feeling right into them. And so because I'm not always the greatest at feeling into things that uh, I don't really want to, and I think most of us struggle with this to some degree. Um, I can't always be trusted, I guess, to dive into my feelings and on my own accord. And so what ends up happening is I draw these experiences to myself so that I can inflict a little bit of self harm, because it's doing those activities. It's through those activities that we go, oh my gosh, what have I been doing to myself, right? Like it's through that type of experience that we realize, and that's why I'm talking about it. That it was perfect that I was doing that, but it doesn't have to be done that way. And that's the key thing, is that we don't have to do it that way, right? We can do it in a much more neutral kind of way. we don't have to hurt ourselves with it. It doesn't have to um, be that so punchy with us, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah,
If I might just jump in for a
please.
minute, I feel really what we're getting at is what is the highest and best way to move through very profound emotional pain that we have been involved in, where our actions or our decisions that we've made has helped to create challenging situations for ourselves and other people. And a divorce with children involved is really like the perfect example of this kind of situation. And I too uh, I'm in the exact same situation. It was my decision, my choice to leave my former husband, and thus I was leaving my kids at least part of the time. So I'm in the exact same situation. I've struggled with exactly the same pain to an extent. And just a few things that you mentioned really stand out for me. You said, first of all, I felt I deserved to be in pain. Number two, I felt I was responsible for creating this whole situation and creating my children's pain. Uh, Number three, I needed to pay. I needed to pay for what I did. So just kind of moving out towards perhaps what we now can see are more highest and best ways to be in these situations and move through these situations, feeling everything, but not harming ourselves, not punishing ourselves. And so one of the first things I just mentioned it that I would say, I'm going to mention just two practices that I do around this exact situation. Well, actually three. Okay, number one, I need to feel all of my feelings about it in like a neutral way, as you said, without judgment. Just feeling whatever is arising. Feel all my feelings around it. Number two, it really helps me to understand that it's all co-created. It is not only my creation. Everyone involved, my ex-husband and my children and me, we all created this. We all called it in. We all most likely knew that this was coming in this incarnation. These types of really big events usually we are planned, orchestrated. So this is all for our soul's growth, for all of us, not just me, not just them. It's for everybody. And then number three practice here is to be with my children and encourage them to express their feelings and without judgment on my part. And you actually were involved in one of these gatherings of my children expressing their feelings around divorce and having another man, you come into our family. And actually, I think it was 2 nights before you left, just like 10 days ago, we had this conversation together where I had this cool letter opener that's in the shape of a sword, and we used it as a talking stick. And I think my children opened up quite a bit. What do you think?
Yeah, they did. Yeah. You know, I'm not going to say it was the easiest or most, what's the word? It was a little sort of awkward, a little uncomfortable.
Yes.
It was nice to hear Vivi said some nice things, and I was able to thank the kids for for their welcoming. So that situation for me was good. I had to express some honest reflections on some of the things that they had concerns about as well. So yeah, I think it was all good. But yeah.
Yeah. So I think what I want to say is that these situations, to me at least, can feel messy and overwhelming and complicated, and guilt can come in and shame can come in and regret and wanting to make our children's lives as great and pain free as possible and all of that. And just my guiding light here, my North Star, my compass here is just for everyone involved to be able to just express themselves and to be present to that and to hear each other. And it does seem magically when we do this, it gets what's the word? It eventually, it seems like it starts to feel better. Not that it's easy, but there's some peace. Maybe that's the right
Yeah, I
thing
think
I want to say.
you've
There's peace comes. Peace comes.
you've said before that truth always serves highest and best.
Yes.
There's a healing quality to truth.
Yes.
Truth is divine, and so when it is delivered, it can often be a sort of, I've said this before, but it's kind of like a temperature that could be too hot or too cold for the body. It doesn't necessarily feel great sometimes, but when we sit in it, we end up needing to see things for what they are, and then it's an opportunity for us to accept what is, right? And then that's as long as we feel our feelings with the truth, and we try to refrain from judgment. And so what I wanted to talk about was one way that we can identify the ego and to reduce our self-judgment. So this, if especially when it comes to self-harm, all self-harm's born of this practice by the ego. It's one of the ego's most one of their most challenging tactics to draw us in to a negative story, but it's also one of the core, I guess, foundations of the ego's stranglehold on the personality. And if we can let go of these, or at least the first step is just to notice it. Just notice that this is what we're doing. We don't have to change everything right away. Really, what we just want to do is take on a practice of awareness and observation of what our ego is doing. And if we're not sure how to distinguish ego from our other thoughts, we can basically just sum it up as if something's said to ourselves in fear, that's ego talking. That's our small or lower self expressing its fear. So these fears that are expressed should be heard, right? We should hear them, accept them for what they are. Same with any negative feeling that comes up from the lower self. Most negative feelings, actually, I'll say all negative feelings, are due to the lower self's uncertainty, fear, confusion. That's always the case. In that particular moment, the lower self has forgotten itself. It's forgotten its divinity. And so I don't say that to, I've been sort of, attacked a lot in my days for saying these types of things, because people think that I'm blaming the victim, and I'm or they may claim that I'm telling them to dismiss their feelings and things like that. And it's not like that. We want to feel everything. We want to experience what's brought to us, because that's what lets us see the distortions that exist. And blaming the victim goes perfectly into the next piece of the practice, which is noticing that every single story that we have that informs our suffering is based on this egoic triangle of roles that I've talked about. I think once on the stream before.
Yeah.
And so that I think it's called the victim triangle, the ego's victim triangle. And so in the victim triangle, You know, at the top you have the hero, and then down here you'll have the villain, and then over here you'll have the victim. And so the ego will actually adorn any and all of these roles simultaneously, as long as it will empower or energize the narrative that informs the being to pull away or to be in fear, to in order to try to protect the lower self. Right. That's essentially what's happening. The ego is trying to erect various boundaries to protect the self, and it does that through guilt, shame, fear, that type of thing. And so, for example, in any situation, you can look at yourself and be like, you know, either I'm the hero that failed, so therefore I feel various upset feelings about my failure to save others. So, for example, with my children, I felt like it was my role to be there for them and to provide them stability and comfort and whatever else I can provide them. I failed my role as the hero, right? As the saver or the bringer of goodness to them. I failed that role, so that's painful. But I also was a victim. I was hurt. There was separation happening with me and my ex. We both did a bunch of things, but at the time I was more focused a little bit on what was done to me, right? Like, and seeing things in a little bit of that conflict area. And that's part of the point is we need to see these things, how we feel about these things in order to adjust them. But so I saw myself as a victim, and if only she would be this way, then I wouldn't have had to do this and fail my job as the hero, right? But then also I was a villain. You know, there were parts of me that were aware that I didn't fully understand what was going on. I didn't try hard enough. I didn't, you know, whatever they are, whatever these things are. And then there's guilt and shame that comes from that. And if you're playing that victim card, usually that being a victim implies that we're disempowered. It says that we are at the whim of other entities, whether it's the universe or God or other people in our lives or even ourselves. We're a victim to something. And so the ego wants to perpetuate these stories because that's how it sort of maintains its stranglehold on the on driving, right? Driving the self. So one thing that we can do is look at the situation and just observe our thoughts about it and just notice, where am I playing one of these roles, right? Where am I playing one of these roles? Because wherever I'm playing one of these roles, even if that is a positive role for me or it feels safe or it feels, you know, like if for example, if I think of myself as a great hero person, eventually I'm going to do something that doesn't align with that role. I'm going to hurt someone or by accident or something's going to happen. And I'm going to fail that. And so whenever we're actually building ourselves into these roles, we are denying our divine nature. We're denying what our true self is, and that will feel bad eventually. So
This
we
is
always have to look at
amazing.
that. What are the
Yeah.
roles in this victim triangle that we are participating in that are leading? And we may be participating in all of them or just one or two, right? We have to consider. And the ego doesn't mind saying that I'm a victim, I'm a villain, and I'm a hero all at the same time, as long as all of those understandings about ourselves inform our pain to keep that narrative afloat. Um,
Yeah.
and
Th-
yeah, if we notice it, we can dissolve it.
yeah. This is amazing. I'm so glad you brought this up. And yeah, you did bring this up on another stream and it was amazing then too. Um, this is a great way of looking at the ego. And so a few points that come up for me are, number one, probably we all have an egoic desire to play the hero for our kids. That would just, that would be a natural egoic desire to come up. And I think partly what we're talking about here is relinquishing that role completely.
Yeah.
That it's not, we're all down here as souls experiencing all these expansions. And at times there are going to be things that happen in our families that will not seem heroic to our kids. For instance, divorce. And somewhat letting go of that identity of needing to be the quote unquote hero. Or maybe there's a different way of looking at it. What I realize I really want to offer my children, really just through modeling, is I want them to be their authentic selves, to be able to feel their feelings, to follow their heart, to live in alignment. And if I can do that, then in a way, I hopefully will be like a hero, but I need to let go of that as well. But I guess what I'm saying is I want to let go of being a hero to my kids on the micro level, on the level of, oh, maybe I should have stayed with their dad, or, maybe I should try to always do the chores around the house so they don't have to do them. So letting go of that micro level, heroic, egoic attachment. And I think it's also really interesting to look at yourself and discern, are there certain roles here of the ego that I'm most comfortable in? And for me, I can see that I love being the hero. And I constantly try to play the hero in all of my relationships. And that's not highest and best. And it's also very draining. And it's certainly the role I had as a child in my family with the people around me. So I think that's really interesting to look at, where you like to be on that triangle. I don't like to be the victim, and I don't like to be the villain either. And I'm not saying anyone else likes that either, but that's really interesting. And then to also see how we can impose these roles on other people in our lives very easily. Like, oh, that person is such a hero to me, or, oh, that person is such a villain. Or that person seems to be stuck in a victim role. So as you said, all of these attachments to these roles bring us out of the truth that we are all divine beings. I am, everyone else is, and that we are not here to play any of these roles with anybody. Now, one more point that comes up for me is you and I met in part because we each had a hero title in the groups that we are running. So your amazing YouTube channel, How to Hero. I have had a Facebook group, You Are Your Own Hero. So I'm kind of curious to talk that part out. Like, do I feel like I want to be a hero to myself or not?
Right. Yeah.
Does that identity still hold?
So, yeah, I guess I'll just talk about the reason that I chose hero for the channel. At the time, I wasn't aware of this triangle, the egoic triangle. I wasn't aware that was a thing, but here was my thought process with heroes. We look to others to save us from things, right?
Yeah.
We either look to others, or we look to circumstance or possession or location, whatever it is. We look to the external world to save us from stuff, when it is us who is our savior. It is our divinity inside of us that is what brings us to our true nature and our true being. And so we are our hero, right? So you are your own hero. You chose that as well. So that was part of it. But also, almost all, I think all of the heroes that are depicted in comics and different stories all have what could be called negative or um, character flaws. They all have they all have struggles that they go through in order for them to serve the way they do. So what I was trying to illustrate with that was we're heroes uh, to ourselves and to others in a flawed way, right? We all are perfect in our flaw. Our flaws are just as divine as our positive traits. And so, what I was trying to illustrate, I guess, with that a little bit was just that it's up to us to save ourselves, and that truly there's no saving happening really. It's just a remembering. Um, but through the remembering, we become much more at peace.
Yeah, it's just thinking about it a little bit as you were talking, where I land, I think is similar to what you're saying, is that I do want to be the hero to myself. And at the same time, I want to loosen up the description of a hero, because
Right.
I don't want to feel like to myself I have to be this like perfect, amazing, always together hero either. I don't
Right.
want to be that for anyone else either. So I want to give myself grace, and that I can be a quote unquote imperfect hero to myself.
Right.
And I talk about this so much. To me, success to me, or being a hero to me, is simply that I keep showing up and I keep trying and I keep coming back to my alignment and my guidance and my dreams, and orienting towards highest and best for me and everyone else. Like, if I'm doing that, to me, that's heroic.
Exactly. And
What actually ends up manifesting on the external is icing on the cake. If I just stay in that orientation I just described, then I'm doing the best that I can.
yeah, and uh, all heroes make mistakes in all of the movies and the comic books, and they make errors in judgment or whatever you want to call them. So there are no mistakes in our reality. But we could see it like the hero, the true hero, I think, is just one who, given their limitations and flaw, do their best with what they have on offer to them now. Right?
Yep.
They do their best to be of service, uh, and they help as best they can when it's appropriate. But they also know when it's not appropriate, and often heroes will not get involved in situations and in various comic books and things like that. But I think it's a really good representation of the third density positive entity, right? The third density, or the human, a positively oriented human, still is usually a little confused here and there and makes errors, draws experience to them that is not so harmonious. Maybe they have a really bad day and they yell at people, right? We're not perfect in that way. We're perfectly imperfect, and recognizing that we have characteristics that we're working through, and that recognizing that these things don't make us bad people. They don't make us anything other than beings that are moving through challenge to
Yes.
to improve, right?
Exactly.
And so,
And
oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that in this orientation that we're talking about, what we can reach is peace. We can reach a sense of inner peace, that I'm doing my best. I'm here showing up. I'm being self-aware. I'm learning from things that I do that maybe don't feel great. And that, I've said this a lot on the stream recently, that has become my number one goal or intention above any other aspect of my life is just to maintain as much as possible to sit in my own inner peace, no matter what is actually manifesting around me.
Yeah.
And I think just bringing in to this a blanket of grace, always a blanket of forgiveness, a blanket of unconditional love for ourselves and everyone else. It just, I feel like everything we're saying is just basically common sense, but it's so hard to do. It sounds simple, but the practice of it is so hard to do because of all the judgments that can come in from other people
Other,
and from ourselves,
right.
and all the stories and narratives and plot lines that have been laid out for us.
Yep.
So it's to land in this place of inner peace and blankets of grace and forgiveness towards yourself and everyone else is an amazing feat.
Yeah.
Actually, I think it's quite amazing to do that.
Yeah. I often, to help dissolve some of my egoic stuff that comes up, I'll often remind myself, like, I'm doing my best. Like, I can say that fairly and be fairly like confident that, yeah, I am generally doing my best. I don't always do my absolute best with every single moment, but overall I'm trying to do as close to my best as I can muster in the moment, right? um and really,
So,
what else can really be expected of anyone? um you know,
exactly.
what else can anyone really do but their best? If their best doesn't really meet an expectation, uh is it the person that are they broken? Are they garbage? I mean, I don't think so.
No,
I think
definitely
that
not.
they're probably just doing their best and they'll get better. um and so
And
oh, go ahead, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just thought of this new little idea for me. We often always talk about letting go of what other people think of us. It's just such an important practice. So I feel partly what we might be talking about here in this stream is also letting go of what our own ego might think of us.
Yeah, we have to
It
realize that the
is
ego.
maybe the most important practice,
So if
even beyond other people's judgments.
and
Let go of the ego's judgments of
Exactly.
ourselves.
And that's how I do it, is I basically say, well, what else can I do other than my best?
Yeah,
So why am I so upset with myself? Right? Obviously,
right.
it's not real. Obviously, I did my. What else am I supposed to do? So the ego is kind of showing its hand a little because it's speaking to me as if I've done something wrong, or as if I'm not good enough. I don't deserve something. I have no value. I'm worthless. Whatever it is. Um, but
And
yet I've done my best, and what there is no logically, there's nothing else that anyone could ever do uh better than their best, right? So as long as I have done that, then I can look back at it and feel, satisfied. But if I can look back and go, well, I didn't really do my best there also, right? So I can use that. That's where ego can be helpful, is it
yeah,
lets us know you could have done that better than you did, right? So ego helps us in some ways at correcting, and actually in all ways ego is always there to help us correct back to our divinity over time, right? um
yes, and it's at least for me, it's always the pain that I feel when I realize I've hurt someone or I could have done something in a way that wouldn't have been as hurtful, and then I feel the pain of that, and I want to forgive myself and I want to do better the
yep,
next time. And it's the pain becomes the catalyst to doing better because
yep,
I don't want to feel bad again. And then another piece here that I think needs to be said is I get in this word atonement a lot. Atonement. It sounds kind of heavy and serious in a way, so maybe there's a better word, but at least for me, I do like to atone when I have misstepped towards other people. When I was doing my best in the moment, but I ended up hurting people and I ended up seeing, oh, I can do that better. And I would say probably some of the biggest atonements for me have been towards my children.
Mm-hmm.
And this was an expansion for me, because growing up, people in my family that were raising me, just maybe they weren't aware of saying I'm sorry or I can do things better. That didn't happen. I didn't really know that a parent could do that. So it's been this journey for me to like realize, of course I can apologize to my kids
Mm-hmm.
and ask for their forgiveness. And I like to tell them how I'm going to do things better. Sometimes I'll write it down. I'm going to do this next time. I'm going to try to do this next time so that things can go better. So that also helps me at least have such a sense of peace, that to do some formal atonement when I've really done something that's been hurtful to someone else.
Right. I'd like to just share how I see that word. That word is a loaded word.
Yeah, I feel it. I
And,
feel it is too.
and it's also, I think it was distorted from the original teachings.
Mm-hmm.
Atonement, and I'll just express how I see atonement and how atonement moves through sin to forgiveness. So atonement, when it was originally created, meant at one meant it
Ah.
meant observing that all is divinity. So divinity makes no mistakes, right? So I often say there's no mistakes. So for whatever reason, this mistake the human made, the lower self did a thing that it feels that it made an error or did something to hurt people, whatever it is. Divinity deemed that mistake to be appropriate. So therefore, it's not a mistake. It's in congruence with divinity to so that the individual can remember themselves and know themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's the sort of the ultimate purpose of it. Of course, there are lots of details to it in the 3D or human world that are perhaps uncomfortable, disturbing, whatever they are. But there are no mistakes. If it happened, it's divine.
Mm-hmm.
Atonement means at one mint with the divinity within, recognizing the perfection of the self, which noticing the perfection can only be done in a purity of forgiveness. So atonement is the dissolution of sin, knowing it is as distinctly unreal through finding unity consciousness, finding the idea that I am not doing anything. I am not, I'm not, uh, I'm a vessel that divinity expresses itself through. And Sean didn't do anything. My consciousness observed this vessel run around and do stuff. And then with the confusion attached that all of those roles that Sean played to my being, like identification, and then said that was wrong, that was wrong, that was wrong. And it gets a little challenging for somebody to to hear this, because it sounds like I could be saying do whatever you want, hurt whoever you want. It's divinity, it's divine, baby, right? It
Yeah,
sounds like I'm saying that.
if I can jump in, the way I see it is we're talking, for me at least, on two different levels. We're talking, there's a human level, 3D level, you might call it, and then there's the overall spiritual, what's really going on. And so for me at least, I absolutely agree with you that all is always happening for highest and best and for everyone's expansion. So even my missteps with my kids was perfect for all of us. But then at the human level, to me at least, I do want to apologize.
Mm-hmm.
And I do want to say I'd rather do that differently.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to just toggle or, hold both of those levels simultaneously. And this has come up in our namaste method as well, of communication between people, that we do, this is what we practice, that we aim to be in our God selves all the time, which is unconditionally loving and accepting and non-judgment. And then on the human level, there may be some repairs that could be offered to someone that feels hurt, or apologies. So I just try to hold both of those all the time, and not just this aspect, but every aspect of what's going on.
Yeah, it's really important that you bring that up. There, like you said, there are two layers. So the human layer, while it's sort of stamping its feet, right, and it's having its tantrums of some kind, whether they're sad or angry, whatever, resentful, whatever they are, guilty, those tantrums are indicative of an imbalance, right, in the self. So they're always appropriate, and what that but they're always they're coming up to be experienced, right? So the other thing that I'd like to say is that when I say that there were no mistakes, I'm not suggesting that the behavior that you did was behavior you'd like to continue, or anything like that. I'm not suggesting we don't observe what we've done and how things fell into effect through causality. As we act, things happen. There are consequences of positive perception and negative perception depending on how we perceive things. That's all true. And so we are learning to act in accordance with our divinity, to act as the Christed being. The only time we really need, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, the only time we really need to closely evaluate ourselves in that way is when we've acted maliciously, I think. So when we've acted with a thought to hurt, then we have lost our divinity. Mm-hmm. If we act and we act from our divinity, so we act in love, our intentions are golden, there's no malicious intent at all, then really, and the other person gets hurt, they've forgotten their divinity. We didn't forget ours, right? In that moment. And so we don't want to cast it on them and project it as a problem. They're causing a problem. It's not like that. Both of you are creating this together. But if you're just acting in harmony with yourself and being authentic and truthful, that is the goal. Sometimes when you're doing that, other people don't like it. Just because they don't like it doesn't mean that there's something that's been done wrong, right? And it doesn't mean that that anything has to change. Now, of course, hear them, and there may be aspects that you can shift. There may be ways of speech that you can consider adjusting to be more digestible, or to be better heard, or to help be more clear. But really, when we're observing situations, we have to try to let go of what the other is experiencing, because they're experiencing their own stuff, right? They have their own wounds, their own stories, they have their own preferences, they're their own being. And really the only standard we can ever try to set for ourselves is to try to act virtuously, and try to think virtuously. So try to be, as much as we can, behold others as God, behold others as God would see them, and behold ourselves as God would see us. And in doing that, their discomfort is also perfect, and we won't find that we need to necessarily change. However, we can observe all of that, what occurred, and just objectively, or in a neutral way, notice, oh, my intentions were pure. I was doing my best. Uh, there wasn't a part of me that was hurt and trying to harm. Unless there was, and if there was, then that's the part we can look at and go, oh, I was being a little bit hurtful. I did forget myself a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
and
And
so
if
that's how
I,
we can I think look at it in a way that's more that's balanced and still remembering what we are,
yeah.
while reviewing our behaviors to try and find harmony with others.
Yes. And I would just add one more possibility. You talked about, you know, was my behavior malicious or was it not? And I think there's another area in between, which is just basically, was I out of balance? Was I out of alignment? Maybe I wasn't being malicious at all, but
Yeah.
I was triggered, I was hurt. I wasn't intending to hurt the other, but because of my own out of alignmentness and uncenteredness and basically forgetting my divinity, I may have acted in a way that ended
Right.
up being hurtful to the other person. So
Totally.
I think, at least for me, I don't think I really ever act maliciously, but sometimes I am out of balance and triggered. And those have been the situations with my kids,
Right.
where I have caused pain because I was a bit out of control. I lost my cool basically because I was in so much pain and triggered, and that just spilled out onto them.
Yeah.
So,
Even that's what I meant sort of when I said malicious intent, because the reason that those things spill out is the ego judging and casting judgment out. So it is there's a layer of maliciousness that is not always easy to be seen. The egoic self, basically, for example, if we're really hurt, the egoic self may want attention of some kind, and tries to pull it in. It's acting, it acts in sometimes in a desperation. um I guess that's what I meant by malicious. But the other way that we could do it is more closely to what you said, is that whenever we're doing that, malicious or not, um we forgot ourselves. So did basically, if I'm reflecting on any of these moments of things that I've done, did I forget myself? And if the answer is yes, then you could be grateful, because forgetting ourselves is the path to remembering.
yes.
And if we didn't forget ourselves, we wouldn't remember ourselves.
Yeah.
The
If
entirety
we,
of that was created so that we could realize that we forgot ourselves, and then can observe that, and basically course
if we,
correct without judging that
yeah.
action.
And if we didn't at times forget ourselves, I don't think we could even see ourselves. If
Well, exactly. Yeah.
if we didn't at times act from fear or not from love, then we couldn't really see how, oh, normally I do act from love.
If we didn't,
We need the contrast at times to just see. If we're just only always love, 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 and no sort of missteps, it's hard to even see ourselves.
if we didn't forget ourselves, then we wouldn't be doing this at all. Um,
Yeah.
the forgetting is a required component for free will to exercise its choice in this
Yeah.
density of love or fear. And
Yeah.
so, another thing is that when we're doing teachings like this, that are centered around high vibrational unity based forgiveness, the people that are going to tune into this and hear it are not people uh, that are at the vibration, that are calling for ways to be their best selves, right? Like, or sorry, those people are the people that are calling to try to remember themselves. These are the people that are in their house and, calling to God, asking to remember themselves. And then the next day they see some content that helps them to learn new ways to approach self-forgiveness, for example, right? So, it's not likely that somebody that's very angry and very consumed with fear and maybe hatred, whatever, is going to stumble across this thing where I tell them everything that they're doing is divine. Um, they're not calling for that vibration of a teaching. And so, like, as humans, we kind of think I'm giving a pass to everyone, and that I'm saying that everything is fine and everything, no matter what anyone does, it's perfect. And I am saying that. But I'm also saying that we have feelings as humans. We have feelings of judgment around everything that happens, and we actually are the creator of all of it, uh, collectively and then individually, and then also, like, at a more global or universal level. There's different layers to the creation, um, and when we observe the truth of what's occurring, we, for example, if we see two people in a very, unsettling situation, and maybe one of them hurts the other one, like physically, let's say a man attacks somebody or something, these divine beings are forgetting themselves. Maybe the victim, or I shouldn't even say victim, but maybe the person who was attacked doesn't maybe they're very high vibrational, right? And the other person is lower vibrational, and they attack and they do their thing. That story, as the observer of it, we're like, wow, that's a crappy thing, right? Like, we judge that, because we feel empathy, right? We feel sympathy, empathy. We may feel compassion for the person who attacks as well, like I do, because I know they're so confused that they're attacking other people, which is just attacking themselves, and they don't know they're doing that. And so I feel compassion for both, and that's where we want to try to move to, right? So when we talk about becoming Christed, or seeing divinity within, stepping into our God self, we have to be able to observe negativity with the eyes of the Christ, which is,
Yes.
observe negativity with love. That's the only way to move into forgiveness, is to recognize that although this sight is very unsettling to me, I need to learn how to look at that with love. I have to learn that in order for me to be able to accept that this is my creation. Even though I had no active participation in this event, I observed it and it happened. I might start to think that humans are gross. I might start to think that men are gross, or I can create all of these stories if I'd like to, and some of us will, and some of us will go down those roads too.
Yeah.
But we
And
don't have to do that. And
what
yeah.
one of the most profound orientations that I learned during my psychotherapy doctorate work, and I've said it many times to you, is how does this person's behavior make sense given their context?
Yeah.
And pretty much every horrific act that we've experienced as humans, there's always a context of how that arose for that person. So like you, yeah, I always have compassion on that side of the people who are quote unquote doing the atrocities, because they're in so much pain and so much disconnection from their divinity.
Yeah.
And what I also wanted to share is that we're largely talking about self-forgiveness, as well as forgiveness towards others, but self-forgiveness. And I think it's also helpful in our own process of self-forgiveness, especially around really big things like, say, custody situations for our precious children, to realize there may be a grieving process that we're going through as part of the self-forgiveness. Just it gets kind of all jumbled up, I think. But I think being able to move through possible stages of grief around a very difficult situation really enables the self-forgiveness as well. Um, I've said this many times on the stream that I was able to move to forgiveness towards my ex-husband because I went through, I think basically a big grief process. I felt all my anger towards him and denial and sadness, and eventually I got to acceptance. And but I think that also can pertain to ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
that maybe if we've acted in a way that upon reflection we would like to act differently, there could be like denial at first, like I don't even really want to look at how I acted. That's too painful. It's too painful for me to look at. Then there can be anger at ourselves, and then possibly bargaining and sadness, and then eventually acceptance. So I think in big situations that are really painful, it might be helpful to also look at self-forgiveness as partly a grief process.
Yeah, that's interesting. Um,
Yeah.
so I'd like to kind of simplify forgiveness as a concept for everyone here, because you brought up a good point. You said we were talking about, I was talking about an external sort of circumstance, and you said a lot of it's self-forgiveness. And it made me realize that there's a distinction that I could make here to distill this a lot. All forgiveness is actually self-forgiveness. There is no forgiveness of others because there is no other. And so that's the base core truth, that not only is there there's no other person doing things. What all that's happening is you're perceiving something, right? Like you're perceiving something within. So self-forgiveness in its most basic boiled down form is literally forgiving confused perception. So when we're observing any circumstance of any kind, or internal feelings about ourselves or about other circumstances, any of it is all perspective. It's all our thoughts, opinions, biases, preferences about what we're observing, either within ourselves or outside of ourselves. So when we feel, just as an example, I'll do two examples. I'll do one for an external thing and one for an internal thing. If we observe that somebody runs into my car, right, and they damage my vehicle, and maybe let's just say they're texting and driving, so they're doing something totally stupid, let's say, and they're just like texting and driving, and not paying attention to the road, or whether they're texting or not, they're not paying attention to the road. Maybe they're drunk. Let's say they're drunk, and they drive into my vehicle. Now there's a whole bunch, especially if they're drunk, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going to come up from the human that says they shouldn't do this. They're a bad person. They weren't paying attention. This is all their fault. All of that stuff, right? What's happened there is we've forgotten that we drew this to ourselves. We've forgotten their divinity. We're judging them, right? So, that type of behavior is generally a bit of a call for help, right? That's how I see it anyway. I see it as a bit more of a call for help, but like I'm so detached from my environment that I don't even take basic survival protocols, right? I don't even care what's happening, basically. Yeah. I'm so detached from everything. And so, to me, there's a lot of compassion that can be found for that individual, that ran into your car. It's just a car, right? No one was hurt. It's just a car. But either way, the perception is that this person is not divine. Look at this horrible thing they've done. Look at this, how stupid they're acting. Look at whatever it is, right? All that's happened there is we've had a confused perspective and forgotten their divinity, and we're thinking judgmental thoughts. And we can realize that and go, oh my gosh, I fell into my egoic sort of thought patterns of judgment, and I can let go of that. The same thing happens internally. We do something, or someone says something about us, or they say, look what you did to me, or whatever it is, or we, leave our marriage, and it causes a rift, and it causes, turmoil to come up and conflict, and there's a bunch of pain. in the family as things separate across and everyone tries to normalize to the new state. We may tell ourselves that we're failures, we're bad parents, we're all these things. In that moment too, we've forgotten ourselves, and we've denied our divinity. So whenever we need to apply forgiveness, we've always forgotten the divinity of something, um, and forgotten the perfection of something. And in that way, it's always we're always forgiving internally, either we're all we're doing through forgiveness is correcting the perspective. We're correcting how we're framing what is coming into us as experience and circumstance. We're just adjusting so that we can see through the eyes of divinity, and in that way the inertia of karma is stopped. There's once forgiveness comes up, all of the cycling that we've been going through of experiencing this and this and this goes away. And we
Yes.
can't forgive behavior of others that we haven't forgiven within ourselves also. So,
Yes.
if let's say, because I'm often late, let's say, so this is a really good example. I'm late, and if I didn't forgive that of myself, um I would probably get very upset when other people are late, for example, because it would not be appropriate. It would be a problem. Um, and so if I don't forgive myself for being late, then I'm going to experience basically situations where other people aren't on time. And that's going to really rattle me because I'm late and it's also a problem for me. And I feel guilty and shameful about it. Um, which was my experience for many years. So whenever other people were late, I thought it was atrocious. Yet I was like hypocritically, I was late often. Um, but I hadn't forgiven it. I didn't think that the behavior was okay. I was judging myself for this behavior. Therefore, I'm also judging others with this behavior. So we always are forgiving ourselves because we are the thing we're observing, but also we're the only one that has any agency inside of our consciousness to do anything about anything we're observing. Everything is perspective, and so forgiveness is really just correcting perspective to see love instead of the fear that we were looking at.
Yes. And I'd like to add, you brought up um, stopping the karmic cycle. And it's my understanding that many of us are here incarnated in possibly our last round uh, in this way.
Mm-hmm.
And that part of the reason a lot of us are experiencing pretty intense relational dynamics, from marriages to partnerships to parent relationships, is because we wanted to clear as much karma as possible in this lifetime. And as we've been talking about it, the way to do that is through forgiveness. And there have been at least 3 major relationships in this lifetime for me that I have seen previous very traumatic lifetimes, past lives or parallel lives, however you want to call it. And I have been able to reach places of forgiveness with all of these 3 people and basically cleared those relationships from their karmic entailments. And I've gotten in from spirit. Basically, I've done what I set out to do as a soul around that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't think it can be overemphasized how helpful, even from this sort of incarnative cycles that we can be on, to forgive, because if not, there's energy there between you and someone else, and you have to come back and see if you can give it a go again for forgiveness.
Yeah. And you can observe too, in generations of families, for example, that forgiveness by the child will absolve the entire family, transmute the entire family, and end the cycling of behaviors.
Yes,
So,
yes.
you know,
You and that has been my experience with these three relationships, that it was kind of my initiation of the peace and forgiveness that paved the way for the, so in other words, even if the other person is not really on board with forgiveness, it's almost like you can wash your forgiveness over them, and sort of magically there will be peace eventually.
yeah.
One
So
person can do it.
the way I like to look at this is, so light, light illuminates. It transforms everything that it touches,
Yeah.
whereas darkness doesn't transform anything. It just hides things. Uh,
Yeah.
light light illuminates and brings out the truth, and darkness hides in illusion. So whenever we're shining sort of our divinity into situations, the person that's in the receiving area of this, either they will sort of be bathed in this love, and the situation will begin to heal. It doesn't necessarily heal in a moment, right? But it will begin to heal, as you forgive it. They can realize that as they may start to notice that they did something that they don't now in hindsight think was a mistake. They can go, but at least Tassel forgives me, right? Like Tassel forgave me for this. It's okay. They can forgive themselves now too, but and begin to heal all that. They'll either do that usually, or they'll just run away from it all, right? And so either way is perfect, because if they're not ready to heal it, if they have to hold on because they haven't learned and they don't want to learn yet, they're not ready to learn yet. It's not part of their pathway right now. They may just run away from that catalyst of asking them to look at themselves, right? Because
Yeah.
that's really what it's doing.
And I think what's really interesting is that with our ex-spouses, for instance, where most likely there were other lifetimes where things went down, and you've come into this lifetime in part to bring peace there. You it's very hard to run away from your ex-spouse when you share kids. So
Yeah.
it's almost just like this cool little orchestration that you're gonna probably have to stick in there with them and work things out
Yeah.
because you have kids. So I
Or
know
you
for
can just
me,
have a tumultuous, conflict ridden,
you can
you know,
keep doing that and
if
then
that's what
come
you want
back
to have, you
again.
could totally do
Yeah.
that too.
But I feel like possibly with the souls that we may have had quite a bit to work out, we may have chosen to come into this lifetime, get married, get a divorce, have children, and then, we really, it's going to be really hard if we don't try to work things out. So it's like sort
Yeah.
of extra motivation to work it out. So
Um,
it's cool.
Angelic Sunflame asked a question. I think it's a really good question, so thank you very much. And I saw your other comments, and I'm going to share them with Tassel after. Thank you so much for watching and everything. She says, or he, I don't know, I think it's a she. She says, knowing and believing that we chose to experience it all here doesn't clear it all. And so I would say no. Knowing that, uh, unless it's a purity of knowing. So, and when I say that, I mean you have to know that and recall that in all moments. If you're doing that and recalling it in all moments, that means that you've transcended suffering. So the indication to us is, do I suffer? Then no, I haven't forgiven. So that's always the base of it. There is no suffering unless there's forgiveness that needs to be applied. No suffering at all. Even pain in the body is forgiveness. But The challenging part is just to realize, I think this was challenging for me, is to realize that I know that, right? I know that, yet I experience pain. This becomes another way for the ego to get upset with us, right? I know better now, right? I know this is divine. I know I planned this. I know I created this, yet I'm still really upset. Why? What's wrong with me, right? So we have to be careful, because just because we know these things, and we know them to be true, we still have to have a more direct experience of the forgiveness. We need to sort of go, like, purposefully, if we can, go into these experiences, like revisit them and try to look at them from eyes that are not so tied to what happened to us and where the victims are and the villains. And again, go back to that ego triangle of who did what to who and all that stuff. We need to look at things again and relinquish all of that and just notice that it was a sort of divine love and a play of sorts to help us remember ourselves. And
And I feel like what you're saying is coming from the wisdom perspective. And then I would also chime in that I think we can know on a spiritual level that everything's happening perfectly for our expansion. But to me, at least, to move through it to peace, I need to allow my human to feel everything, to
yes.
feel the pain.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I was trying to get to. Yeah. There's, so the wisdom can't do any, so knowing alone doesn't do anything. Knowing is only half of the battle. You have to know and apply love. So, forgiveness is the application of unconditional acceptance. It's sort of the recognition of divinity in whatever is occurring, and so that's a purity of love, right, on offer to whatever's going on. So you're transmuting your experience into love through your feminine principle. The masculine principle of wisdom knows, right? It knows already that this is divine and we created this together. But knowing that doesn't heal it. It just helps you know that the pain is not quite aligned, which is great because it leads you to eventually realizing, well, I know all this, but I keep having pain, right? I know these things, but all this pain keeps coming up, guilt, suffering, whatever it is, keeps coming up. And that's because we're not loving and accepting with aligning with our knowing. We're forgetting what we know, more or less, and we're not opening our heart to and forgiving in love and feeling also what comes up. The feelings are coming up to show us that despite our knowing, we're still sort of in confusion, because because we've been denying. And that's, we've talked about, it's, I don't like to call it spiritual bypassing, but basically our knowing sometimes will say, I know this feeling that I'm having is born of confusion, therefore I reject it entirely. And when we do that, we're saying, go back inside me and just stay there. I don't want to look at you right now. And it will come back. So
you feel it to heal it. Feel it to heal it.
Feel it to heal it. And if it feels like it's too, your higher self never gives you too much. But if you feel like it's too much, you don't feel like you can handle it, shove it back in if you want. But it's gonna come back. And so when it keeps coming back, keeps cycling, it just means, although we know that it's all divinely perfect, it doesn't mean we've necessarily forgiven and allow that energy to flow through us and to sort of ground us and bring us back to ourselves.
Yes. So maybe that's a good place to
that's an hour 20 minutes. So thank you so much for all the chat. I'm gonna send it. I love what you said about Tassel, and I'm gonna share that with her at the end of this. So thank you so much, Angelic Sunflame, and everyone else who watched. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna be doing the metaphysical monthly webinar or sort of Zoom meeting with everyone on Thursday is the plan. So hopefully today I'll get a video out to invite people. I want to allow everyone to come for free to this one. And then from there on, it'll be limited to patron members. But and then maybe I'll do another one free here and there. But that'll be happening on Thursday, and I'll probably do a video or something to announce that, and the link for Patreon's below if you guys are interested.
Yes, we mentioned it before, but we had such a great time last Thursday night for our monthly course in the Patreon community. It was about how to connect with your higher self. And Sean shared some just amazing information about the higher self. And we did some practices to connect, and it was just great. So yeah, and this week is the Metaphysical Monthly. So please consider looking into our Patreon community. It's really amazing, and you can be involved in it for as little as $5 a month. It's a great deal. Awesome. So much love to everybody, and forgiveness to self, and blessings, and all good things to everybody.
Thank you so much for watching. Take care.
Bye.